Hello, everybody. This is Marc Cervantes, and this is Sir's Legal Morsel of the Day. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I've got Mike Hewlett of the Hewlett Group of Jameson Sotheby's Real Estate here to talk about appraisals and how there's been an increase in low appraisals comparatively to contract prices. Mike, say hello.
Hello, everyone.
And Mike, why don't you tell everybody what you normally do when it comes to first listing a property, how you come up with a value. Does it come out of thin air?
Well, no, not at all. It totally depends for coming up with a value. If you're in a condo building, for example, and you've got 30 floors of the same unit, and there's units that have sold in the last 6 months, you've got some pretty good comparable data. Now, there are different finishes and sometimes different outdoor space and things. But when it comes to houses, they tend to be a lot different, single family homes. So it all depends, and there's everything in between, townhomes and stuff. But generally what I do, what I think a lot of agents do, is we look for the center. You've always got outliers on each side, but then you kind of look at the center and you use your head and common sense, and then you look at the finishes that this house has, the square footage, the year it was updated or built, et cetera, et cetera. Then you kind of back into a number. But really, it's a range. Very rarely do I say a house is worth this much exactly to the penny. That's just not realistic, but usually it's a range. So it's kind of how we do it. We kind of back into it normally. So yeah, appraisal, the rebuttal process, when we go through it, it's not a whole lot different, but I'll let you jump into that when you're ready.
So what have you been seeing with regards to contract value versus appraised value recently?
So personally, only the one deal that we had that had an appraisal issue. I've heard from other agents that they've had some appraisal issues recently. Not a lot of them, frankly, but a few of them. I had an issue the other day that I thought was going to be an appraisal issue, but we ended up getting past that. And we can talk a little bit about that as well, if you're ready.
Let's talk about the deal that we currently have, where the contract price versus the appraised price was about $16,000 less than the contract price. What did you do once we found out about that issue?
So the first thing, so obviously I've been doing this a long time, and the first thing I always do is go right to the appraisal report. You want to look at it line item by line item, detail by detail, because you want to see if there was any mistakes that were made. I mean, the one thing you could never do is go back to an appraiser and say, hey, I disagree with you on value because of A, B, and C. You got to have new data, like their interpretation of the data. You're not just going to talk them into a new price. That does not work. You have to find new data. So that is in the form of, for example, this property, there was one of the sales that I didn't think was market rate, because as you know, Mark, there was a plat issue with it, and it took many, many, many months to sell, had to have a seller concession to keep the buyer in the deal. I didn't think it was a market rate deal. And then there was another comparable sale that she had completely missed. I don't know how, but she completely missed it.
Could you
so
explain
between those two things,
market rate for the audience?
Yeah, so market rate transaction is a typical buyer. They call it like an arm's length transaction, a typical buyer and a typical seller. What is not market rate is something like a foreclosure or a short sale. Those are properties that would not be market rate. Okay. Sold at a discount.
So once we found out that it underappraised, what did you then do? You went through the appraisal, and what else did you do?
Went through the appraisal is the first thing to try to identify any errors. Of course, number two to always do is you call the lender right away and you go, listen, I don't agree with the appraised value. Here are my thoughts on this. What is your process for the rebuttal process? This particular lender was Chase, and they don't call it rebuttal. There's a different term they use, but industry-wide, it's generally referred to as a rebuttal. So I followed his protocol. He said, listen, get me the comps, get me all the data you're telling me about right now. Just send it to me in an email. Sometimes they might want to see a comparative market analysis or something a little more formal. He just wanted a thorough email. So in this case, I sent him the new comp. I found out the data to support that it wasn't market rate. Took me a couple of days to put it all together, but I finally put it together, sent it to him in an email, and we didn't find out for, a week?
Sure. So now we're also assuming in this case that we had, the buyer was willing to wait on a rebuttal. It's been my experience that a lot of buyers, once they see the low appraisal, it's mentally there and they think they're overpaying for a property, even though they had agreed to a price on the contract. Now all of a sudden they see a low appraisal and they think they're overpaying for it. You know, in this case, we were able to have a buyer that really wants to buy the property, and they felt that the amount negotiated was a fair price and was the market rate, correct?
Correct. Andy was a little bit concerned that he wouldn't be able to buy the property because he didn't have the additional out-of-pocket $16,000 that he would have had to come out of pocket had the seller not agreed. So I think ultimately he was happy that the appraised value came back up. But like you said, not everyone is in that case. But also with these guys, they saw the comp that the appraiser missed. And when I talked to the buyer's agent later, he said we were basically hanging our hat on that one comp, which was very close to our sale price, slightly smaller house. So it really supported the value. I don't know, frankly, how the appraiser missed it, but yeah. So in this case, we got lucky. But you're right, that happens a lot, and then you just have to work it out. You know, many times buyers and sellers just kind of have to find a middle ground to make it work.
Correct. So, you know, in summary, then it takes a full team. It takes both attorneys. It takes both agents. It takes the buyer and seller all to be on board with the appeals process with regards to these. And it also takes a lender that's willing to do this as well then, correct? Is there anything else
Correct.
that you found to help us get to the contract price?
As far as once you get to the formal rebuttal, no, I think you just have to follow the lender's direction. You have to find the new data. That's the key part. You really just need new information that the appraiser might not have had. But then, like when he told me to send it in an email, I immediately knew that that email was going to get directly forwarded to probably not only the appraiser, but her manager as well. So I put some language in the email, kind of letting her off the hook because I know that people do not like to be told that they're wrong. So I put language in the email that said specifically, there's no way she could have known this, you know, and it's true. Some of the data was true. There's no way she would have known it. But I think that helped change it as well. Ultimately, the lender never told me exactly what it was. The appraisal company just came back and changed the value. So,
well,
yeah.
Appreciate your time, Mike. And once again, everybody, this is Mike Hewlett of the Hewlett Group of Jamison Sotheby's, and we're going to be continuing these legal morsels of the day with the things that we're seeing out in the market. Mike, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you on the next transaction. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Always a
Thank you,
pleasure.
everybody.